something that I immediately saw was how much they care about all the children there, how much that they're like, "We got this," and you can tell if someone gets it, and they do. And they never made me feel judged. I'm like, "Well, what if he screams the whole time and he's so unhappy? Or what if this or what if that?" They're like, "We'll call you," but at the same time, like, he's gotta learn how to go to school, and all of these peers are gonna teach him how to go to school because he doesn't know. I want him to be empowered with more than one advocate, and I want him to know, like, yes, mommy's there, but at the same time, these are people that are on your team that are so important that care about you, and you can go to them and they can help you. These are trusted people. These are safe people. And that's huge. And it's so vulnerable to allow someone to do those things, right? It's terrifying. What if he like gets lost? What if this? What if that? And so it is this vulnerability that you have to kind of surrender to.
At the end of the first episode, Hayes was about to enter BEEP as a student. The tour was over. Lauren had seen enough to consider enrolling him there. But how a teacher and administrator respond while a parent is standing beside them is not the same as knowing what happens after the parent walks away. Hayes could not come home and describe his day. He couldn't tell Lauren who comforted him, who misunderstood him, or who became frustrated when he screamed. But Lauren knew that if Hayes' world was to become bigger, first, she needed to let people join. I'm Dr. Andrew Goff, and this is Love as a Classroom, Stories of Inclusion, Episode 2, Making Room. Both of Hayes' parents brought him in on that first day. The therapist who had worked with him at home was there too. The adults had information about Hayes, but information about a child means little without knowing the child. And Hayes, he didn't know any of them yet. Stephanie recounts the first day Hayes showed up with his parents by his side.
They were very nervous, which they had every right to be. Hayes was not exactly comfortable and willing to just let go of mom and stay with the classroom. He did roam around a little bit to check things out and began to jump up and down and cry and scream because he just wasn't comfortable. It was a very unfamiliar place. The rest of the morning after mom and dad left, I spent in the hallway with Hayes. We had a therapy pod swing. And I just put him in the swing and blew bubbles for him. And he really was in that swing for long periods of times. He would be in there, get out for a little bit, roam around the building, back in the swing. One of our therapists from BOCES was there just to try to help ease that transition because she had worked in the home with him, which we were so grateful for her being there.
Most of that first morning did not happen in the classroom. It was in the hallways and outside. The BOCES early interventionist, she didn't work for BEEP, but she worked with them. She worked with the family, and she stayed back, taking pictures for Lauren, not as a casual update, but for connection, because Lauren couldn't ask Hayes whether he was safe. After that first day, Lauren faced the same decision again and again. Was this a morning when Hayes could not manage school? Was sending him asking too much of him and too much of BEEP?
There were times when I would go in there and he would just be melting. Then I would know, okay, it's too much. And that's where April had to kind of talk to me. And Stephanie did as well. But April kind of mentioned to me, like, because I always thought, okay, if he's not at baseline, I don't want to send him because then it's going to be too challenging. Do you always think that people like are going to see him as a disruption or as a burden? And they're like, well, I don't want my child to be a burden to anyone. And it took me a long time to trust that they don't see him that way. And so I would think, well, if he's not at baseline, I can't send him. And April had a really good point. She was like, if you do that, he's never going to go to school. And she's like, literally, you're right down the street. You got my number, you got their number. We have communication through our school system. Like, we will get a hold of you.
I am acutely aware of caregiver fatigue, and I worried that her fears that were unwarranted would stop him from having an opportunity.
This is April, the director at Beep.
And I only know that because I have been there, and it's easier and safer to keep them at home. There's the routine, there's the safety net, there's the I can't do that because of. And what ends up happening is that I do think that limits the students' opportunities for growth and other meaningful relationships. And I wanted Lauren to know and feel confident that we had the whole family. And Hayes is not a kiddo that you could do that moment by moment because, there is always going to be something that comes up. There's always going to be something that goes, we shouldn't try that because. And so I knew we just had to rip the Band-Aid off and then be able to work together as a team. With Hayes and his family, collaboration was imperative.
April wasn't promising that the day would go well. I mean, she couldn't. But she could promise that whatever happened next would be something they could address together as a team. Lauren wouldn't have to do this alone. The question was whether the rest of the program could sustain the same promise. Lauren still had 2 other young children in addition to Hayes to get through the morning. Drive Hayes to Beep, carry him inside when he could not walk in, leave him while he was already overwhelmed, and then return later to do it all again. April noticed Lauren and Hayes often arrive carrying the stress of everything that had happened before they reached the door.
I don't think that Lauren felt settled, honestly, until we started transporting Hayes. I think that being a mom that has many littles, that the morning routine, dropping him off, picking him up, took a lot out of the whole family. And I remember she would come in the morning and I could just sense that it was hard. And I respected that. And I could have that regard for just what she had to do in the morning in order to get him to us. And I knew how much effort she was putting in. I always try to look at families and say, are we working harder than we need to? And so that's when we decided to see if we could get transportation. I think that was a game changer for Lauren and for Hayes. I think that Hayes is very intuitive to how his mom is feeling, whether it be positive or negative. And I think that the mornings were so intense that they would both come in kind of escalated. And so once we could offer transportation, I think she was able to breathe. And we go right from Beep to the house with his one-on-one. He's able to get into the bus. He comes into Beep thrilled. And I think mom can have a cup of coffee in peace and knowing that she had accomplished so much, but she didn't have to rearrange the entire family to get Hayes to school. So I think that's when she really felt settled and confident.
The reality is that Beep could have treated the difficult arrival as something Lauren and Hayes needed to fix. But instead, they looked at the whole morning. Transportation did not change Hayes. It changed one of the conditions surrounding him. Lauren no longer had to reorganize the family just to get him through the door. Hayes could arrive with someone he knew, and Beep could begin its work before everyone else was already overwhelmed. April had told Lauren they had the whole family. Transportation was just one of the first ways the program could meet that need and show exactly what they meant. Changing the morning made getting to Beep much more manageable. However, it didn't make the classroom any more manageable for Hayes. Stephanie said that work had to be done in much smaller increments.
Over time, as the days went on, we learned to try to modify a schedule for him. And it started out very short, a couple hours at a time, 2 days a week, I believe is what we started out. And it was definitely a learning curve for everybody in that first year. He did not spend time in the classroom. Time in the classroom for Hayes was very short. If he could last in there for 10 minutes in that first year, that was a huge success. If he could find something he was engaged with, whether it was inside the classroom or outside the classroom, that was huge.
"10 minutes. In most preschools, 10 minutes in the classroom, it would be evidence that the placement was failing. At Beep, it was evidence that 10 minutes were possible. It was a starting point for growth, and like anything else, growth requires patience and adapting the changing conditions. Even their definition of inside changed. Inside didn't mean sitting at a table, joining the group, or following the classroom schedule. For Hayes, inside meant somewhere within the building. From the outside, that could look like lowering expectations, but Beep was not abandoning the goal. They were trying to understand where growth could actually begin and what Hayes, Lauren, the professionals, and the other children needed for that growth to continue. But 10 minutes? Well, 10 minutes for Julia wasn't a destination. For her, it was a starting point.
His progress was genuinely measured in minutes. Minutes of regulation, minutes of shared space, minutes where he could stay with me before needing a break. So the earliest victories were small, but they were incredibly meaningful. One of the very first breakthroughs was when he started holding eye contact with me. It wasn't long, just a few seconds at a time, but it was intentional. Soon after, he began grabbing my hand and leading it to what he needed. He would guide my hand to the door handle when he wanted to go outside, or place my hand on an electric toy that had turned off because he wanted me to turn it back on. That kind of hand leading showed joint attention, purposeful communication, and a willingness to let me participate in his world. Then came the dog button. Pressing outside wasn't just a word, it was intentional communication. It showed us he was beginning to understand that he could use tools to change his environment and that we were listening. Around that same time, he started grabbing his jacket when he wanted to go out. At first, he would just hold it, but then he began trying to put it on himself. One arm in, the other tangled, before bringing it to me for help.
The team was not throwing darts in the dark. They were paying attention to what they observed. But they were also building from what other people already knew. The early interventionist brought what she had learned while working with Hayes at home. Lauren shared how he communicated, what helped him regulate, and what movement might mean. That kind of knowledge is easy to overlook. A child can arrive with evaluations and goals, while experiences of the families and professionals who already know the child are treated as background information. At Beep, though, those experiences became part of that starting point. Well, actually, trust was the starting point, but it's hard to build trust without communication. The adults were not waiting for Hayes to communicate in the way other children did or in the way the paperwork expected him to. They were looking for the communication he already used. And gradually, together, they began to understand what his hands were telling them, what mattered to him, what he needed to say, not what they needed him to say. They were listening, genuinely, authentically listening. And whether the person was a new employee, a family, a new learner in the classroom, Beep seemed to understand that trust began by listening for what was meaningful to that person. As the adults got to know Hayes, the classroom began to shift and evolve around what the adults were learning as well as what the children were learning. Some materials were too small because Hayes explored objects with his mouth. He needed movement, sensory input, and the ability to leave before the room became unbearable. The changes were made for Hayes, but they did not remain a private curriculum for him and Julia.
He loved being at the discovery table, and that's a big open area for multiple kids to play alongside him. We'll either do water play or depending on what the filler is in them. We have solo cups that the kids like to play with, like build towers with, and so they'll build a tower for him to knock over. And he's interacting in ways that are geared towards working with that. Dance class is probably their favorite. 30 minutes of rhythm and movement, and they're learning dance moves, and it's such a happy time to be in a classroom when they can just be free with their bodies. He loves movement. He'll walk around with students and he observes them, he watches them, and he will jump and he'll clap his arms.
The changes were not limited to the materials or schedule. If the classroom was going to remain responsive to Hayes and other children, the adults had to be responsive to one another too. Supporting Hayes could be intense. Stephanie explains that Beep did not treat that intensity as something one para could be expected to take on themselves.
We offer to rotate. If the paraprofessional is a little burnt out from being with that one kid or they're just having a rough day, we're like, hey, do you need to tag out? I'll step in for a little bit. So that we're working as a team, not that, hey, this is your job and only your job. That's not how it works. We are all there. We are all there to educate the kids, help the kids in whatever they may need, whether it's physically, socially, academically, emotionally, whatever they need. All the adults in the building are there for every child.
The para could step out, and a teacher could step in. A therapist could offer an idea. Lauren could explain what she saw at home. The plan could change again the next day. No one person was expected to take on all of Hayes' needs alone. It was a team effort. And though his level of support may have been greater than most children's, the response was not unique to him. Beep, they were intentional about the needs of each child, the dynamics already in the classroom, and how much support the team could handle together. They were responsive, not only to Hayes, but to every child in the room. Stephanie, she had a word for how that responsiveness shaped her classroom.
Everything is ish because we could have a schedule, and we do have a schedule that we, for the most part, follow. And then Hayes would have his own schedule. And for the most part, at this point now, going into his third year, we are more able to follow it than we have been the last 2 years. So when I say ish, it's Hayes is in the classroom. He gets there at 8:15, and hopefully he can make it being in the classroom till 8:30-ish. So if 8:25 came around and he was just not having it and absolutely losing it, of course we would move on to something else. We were not going to push him those 5 minutes and have a small whining turn into an outblown tantrum. And just like in the classroom every day with all the other students, we try to make circle time start at 8:45, but it's always an ish. If the kids are really engaged, we don't want to interrupt that. So maybe we'll start circle at 8:50 or even 9 o'clock.
Ish did not mean there was no plan. It meant the plan could respond to the children who were actually in the room, even the adults. And as Julia spent more time with Hayes, the team began learning what his version of that plan needed to include.
They'll be sitting at circle and we'll be in the classroom and he'll like walk through them, and he's so delicate. He'll touch like the top of their heads and they just let him go, let him pass through. They tend to give her his space in those moments. He can get pretty loud, and so they understand that he's not the type of kid who you can just walk up and be like, are you okay? When he's regulated, they'll give him high fives and they'll communicate with him. They'll talk to him and they'll say, okay, look what we're doing. And if he goes to like disrupt their work or whatever, they'll use their words and they'll say, you can have a turn when I'm done. They communicate with him. He is part of the classroom.
The children gave Hayes space when he needed it, invited him when he was ready, and expected him to wait when he interrupted their work. They weren't simply learning to be nice to him. They were learning how to be his classmate. By the end of Hayes' first school year, the other children were learning how to be his classmates. But the end of the school year didn't mean the work stopped.
What people don't understand is how hard we work every day just to go to the bathroom or just to do things that people take for granted. And so for us, like, we don't have summer break. We don't have breaks for us are usually bad because when we come back from school, it's even worse.
For Lauren, summer was not a relief. It was another disruption to manage. Beep's summer program offered Hayes something more ordinary. A chance to keep going and to keep growing. Stephanie worked with Hayes during the summer program. The immediate goal was not academic. It was simply staying inside the building.
The following summer after his first year, I took on a position during summer camp, and Hayes was my sole responsibility. So him and I worked together every day, 3 days a week, just staying in the building and not even staying engaged in anything, but just staying in the building. And we have a room that was our half-day classroom, and we got it set up just as like a classroom / sensory room, just fully everything that he loved to have was in there. And that's where him and I would start out our days. We would set a timer, and that's where we had to be. I would have him do all the expectations that every other child would do when they come in the morning. He would need to wash his hands and check in his name, and then he was free to go and play. And after about 10 minutes of play, he would get the choice of doing 1 or 2 activities, which is always something sensory-wise, whether it was Play-Doh or kinetic sand or water play, but inside the classroom. That was so important.
Wash hands, check in, stay until the timer ended. Stephanie followed his interests, but she also maintained expectations.
It was not an easy summer, but there was definitely growth. And about halfway through that summer, I told Mom, I think we're ready to add a 4th day. And I think she was a little hesitant about it, a little worried. Not so much for her or for Hayes. I kind of feel like she was afraid of me getting burnout or it just being too much on me. So finally I told her, I said, hey, we're on day 4. And she, like, her mind was blown. She could not believe that he made it 4 days for 3.5 hours each day. And he was great. He was awesome.
The changes were becoming visible outside Beep, too. The adults compared what they were seeing and tried to make Hayes' 2 worlds less confusing.
Stephanie brought communication pictures that they're using at school that I could use at home. So I had the full team here showing me things that would help with that consistency for Hayes so he's not frustrated at home. And then he's not, having to do stuff at school that doesn't make sense. And then at home, it's not like that. Because at home, he can run around with food a little bit. Obviously, flyability is full. And he's learned to sit and, be as his peers with his drink. And so it's just so cool to have the IEP meeting at my house. Children's Hospital was mind blown by seeing his progress in the last year. They didn't even have an appointment with him. It's for Wilder. And they just saw him waiting in the lobby, doing all these things that he couldn't do a year ago. And that's all from school. All of it.
No timer, no classroom schedule, no one from Beep asking him to demonstrate anything. He was simply waiting in a hospital lobby. Lauren could see that what he was learning at school was beginning to transfer to other areas in his life. When Hayes returned for his second school year, he continued to grow.
Once the school year had started, we had a schedule for him, and we had to try to abide by that schedule as much as we could, but also keeping in mind that sometimes he just wasn't going to cooperate or really want to do the schedule, whether he understood it or not. Like, his body just could not physically do it. His mind could not mentally do it. So the schedule was, for 15 minutes, 30 minutes in the classroom, we would try to add on a little bit each time to build it up to be in there. And then he would get his outside time because that was his reward. That was his big thing, being outside. And by the end of this second year, we had it to where Hayes was in the classroom for an hour and a half straight. And that is awesome. That is like almost as much as all the other kids are in the classroom straight. We have all put in so much work with him. Every single para and teacher and therapist who has worked with him, everybody, mom and dad, everybody is responsible for part of this. I don't remember the last time that really we've had to call mom or dad or get him home right away because we were unable to console him.
Lauren had once needed reassurance that they would call. Now, Stephanie could not remember the last time they had needed to call. At the end of the school year, Beat planned to walk to the nearby park. The year before, Hayes had stayed behind. This time, the plan included a harness and a tether to keep him safe. Lauren worried about what people might think.
For us, it really is this fish out of water feeling where you're like, okay, I never leave my house. It's terrifying to leave my house. You have to feel like you can take up space and you are worthy of being there. You do get to be included. And so what you learn is a lot of places aren't that inclusive. A lot of places will say they're inclusive, but they're not inclusive enough for my kids. They'll say it to where, they get enough credit for it, but they're not truly that inclusive.
We asked mom how she felt about Hayes walking down there, and we, told her we had all these ideas to put into place for his safety. And she was a little hesitant about it, mostly because she didn't want other people to pass judgment, I think, was her concern. And I told her that people can think whatever they want or feel however they want. The most important thing is that Hayes is participating with his peers and that he is safe. And we walked him down there both days we went. And he walked all the way there and he walked all the way back. And he was a happy boy playing at the park with everybody else. He was engaged there in the bubble play, in the parachute with the balls, just exploring, wandering around, just like all the other kids were.
At the beginning of this episode, Lauren said she wanted Hayes to have more than one advocate, people he could trust, people who could help him when she was not there. The year before, Hayes stayed behind. This year, he walked to the park with everyone else, not because the risks disappeared, but because Beep had built relationships Lauren could trust. Hayes had more than one advocate now. He had a whole community on his team. I'm now beginning to understand why I felt what I felt when I first walked into Beep. Everyone was being who they were, who they are. Julia could be uncertain. Stephanie could question things. They didn't have to become the same person to work together, and neither did the children. Hayes did not belong because he could fit in. He could move differently, communicate differently, and need something different from the people around him. The people at Beep were learning how to make room for whoever he already was. Maybe that's what felt different. People did not have to fit into the place before they could belong there. The place kept changing, kept evolving as people became part of it. In episode 1, I talked about how many people at Beep described it as family. But now I'm beginning to understand what they meant a little bit better. Not because everyone agreed or because the work was easy, but because people were listened to, supported, challenged, expected to keep showing up for one another and adapt without a second thought. But calling a program a family does not explain how it became one. I can't accept that this is some form of secret sauce, a rare collection of personalities that just happen to find one another in a small town in southwest Colorado. That would make Beep interesting, but not especially useful for my intentions as a teacher and advocate. The whole point of telling this story is to understand what other programs can learn from it. How do people with different personalities, experiences, and ways of working become part of the same culture without being expected to become the same? That was where I wanted to look next. Next time on Love is a Classroom, Stories of Inclusion, Episode 3. How did the adults learn to work together? I want to thank April, Lauren, Colleen, Stephanie, and Julia for trusting me with their experiences and allowing me to share their stories. I am also grateful to the Bayfield Early Education Program for opening its doors to this project, and to the many children, families, educators, professionals, and community members whose experiences and contributions are present in these stories, even when you did not hear their voices directly. You've been listening to Love is a Classroom, Stories of Inclusion. If this episode has you thinking about what makes inclusion possible in your program, I developed the Growth Model for Inclusion course, along with other trainings designed to support growth across your program, not only through individual teaching practices, but through the relationships, environments, and systems around children, families, and educators. You can learn more about the Growth Model for Inclusion, explore early childhood trainings, learn about my stories, and listen to past seasons of the podcast at heartsetandmindset.org. I'm Dr. Andrew Goff. Thank you for listening.